Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Disruptive Technologists video webinar. My name is Jeff Paul, and I'm the Disruptive Technologist Webinar Director. Thank you for attending our second online session with Zoom. We miss seeing you all in person at the Microsoft Center, but in the new reality, we can still meet online. This is the second 1 hour session that we're doing in the month of May. We have another 2 to do in the next couple of weeks. We have great panelists and great topics, including fireside chats and main topic panelists. Now, this is our second time doing this event. We did it last Wednesday. As we learn the new technology, we're going to limit the discussion to the moderators and the panelists. We're planning on adding live chat room opportunities in the upcoming sessions. You can also message our founder and organizer questions for upcoming sessions on the Disruptive Technologists New York City meetup site. We will hold a discussion on the challenges and opportunities that emerge in tech that has for age, race, gender, income, and its ability to further education and inclusion. Today, and the next couple of sessions in May, we will discuss tech disrupting diversity, inclusion, and education, and ask the big questions about does this even matter in a pandemic? Does a virus this big and this scary discriminate? Should we care? We hope you enjoy the session today with our amazing moderator and panelist. So now I'd like to introduce you to our MC and host, Lauren Keeson, founder and publisher of Disruptive Technologists. Lauren?
Hi, everyone. Sorry about the bad camera video. I'm getting a brand new camera, but because of the coronavirus, everything's delayed. So it's going to come tomorrow after this webinar. But in the meantime, I just want to thank McCarter English, LLP Law. They are chaired by Dave Soren. McCarter English is a 50-person attorney, venture capital, and emerging companies. If you guys needed something, he represents startups, emerging growth, and mature tech-enabled, and life sciences enterprises, and the investors who support them. They're in all phases of development, from ideation to IPO, and from concept to cash. Regularly counted among the top 10 law firms serving these communities by PitchBook. McCarter's delighted to be Disruptive Technologists sponsor. I can say that because they said that to me, but they are fabulous, and they're making these, actually they've made these last few years our meetups at Microsoft in Times Square in person, and now these webinars, which we do 4 webinars per topic every month now, they're making it all possible. And I also wanted to thank a few other people, Microsoft Reactor. We usually do our events at Microsoft in Times Square, and they have been totally wonderful. And I just have to say that we really appreciate them. Just so you know, Microsoft Reactors are campuses where developers and startup communities meet, learn, and connect. They combine the training on the latest technology, the community meetups, and events with leaders in the industry. And they're an inclusive community for interaction and inspiration. And one of the parts of this whole diversity thing that we're doing this month. There's also Zeotag. You heard Jeff. He's actually our director of our webinars, but he also has Zeotag, which is a video services. And you can meet the founders, and they are, they actually, excuse me, coronavirus. They actually put together these huge, incredible videos, which you will see, because I'll be giving them to you, where they geotag everything, which means they do table contents for everything. And then plus they're adding a transcription addition to that. So they are, we've been with them since the beginning, and we're going to stay with them, and you should watch them as they evolve. And then our last is Hint. They were our first and number one, they've been with us for 8 years now. And while they can't give us hint infused water for these webinars, they usually give us tons of water. People love them. We can't forget our number one sponsor. So anyway, thank you. I'm going to turn you over to Bruce, who is our moderator for our Fireside Panelists, which means we usually, if we have an in-person meeting, which you'll see in the picture that he just put up, we usually have these 300-person events at Microsoft Times Square. He does the Fireside Chat, which is the follow-up chat where people ask questions. He's gotten some questions in the email, and he's going to go ahead and do this. So tonight it's the responding to emails and stuff. So Jeff, who is, by the way, an AI content expert, 5-language fluent, electrical and computer engineering specialist. Go for it. Thanks, Bruce.
Hi, Bruce, you're muted.
Thanks, Lauren. And just to clarify, I do not speak 5 languages fluently. 2 are fluent and 3 others are just tourist level.
He's a tourist. It's okay.
It's okay. So Jeff, if you could go down 2 slides, please. We'll skip the, that's where we are. Okay, just to start, a disclaimer. All of these fantastic panelists who are going to be speaking in a few minutes all do have companies that they work for. So please, anybody listening in, remember that these people are being generous of their time, their experience, their opinions on their own, and do not necessarily represent their company names or anybody else with whom they're associated. So please be nice. Okay, next. So Andrew Vo unfortunately wasn't able to be with us tonight, so he'll get introduced next time. Go ahead to the next one, please. So these are, and by the way, no hidden message. These are all presented in alphabetical order by their first names. No, so completely arbitrary in that regard. So one of our panelists tonight, and I'm really delighted to have her with us, is Esther Dyson, who has quite a name in the tech field. I recall myself reading her newsletters more years ago than I'm sure either she or I would like to admit. And she has recycled herself into community health care, and in particular, the Wellville project that you can read about here, or you can Google it and find out more. It's an amazing, fascinating project, community level health with a goal of social and financial value from community level investment in health. So, okay, thank you. Next is Joanna Gilberti, Chief Administrative Officer of Archemy. 20 years experience. What I found most fascinating was that she actually started as a lawyer and has recycled herself into tech. So fascinating background, very broad, and I'm looking forward to what she has to say on the topic of diversity as well. Next, we have Julian, founder of Culture Creative. The goal of empowering organizations to create communities where every person can achieve their highest human potential, has spoken to an enormous number of people there, 100,000 at least, and I'm sure he'll have very interesting insights to offer us as well. And then last, because that's where his name falls in the alphabet, Voltaire, who is joining us from West Africa, the founder of WeUp, a social gaming platform, who has also been recognized internationally for his efforts, Oxford, Harvard, BBC, and sometime I'd like to hear more about the Philanthropists of the World organization. That's sounds intriguing. And then just 2 words about myself. Next slide. Personally, I have worked on 2 different continents, worked in every continent except Australia, and worked with people from Australia. Lived on 2 continents, have lived myself as an immigrant, and have been passionate about the subject of diversity my entire career. And I've been moderating these now for 2.5 years. It was surprising when I put this slide together just how long it's been. So for tonight's topic, this is actually a follow-on to some questions that were left unanswered last week. So in particular, in our context of the technology sector, because that's the one that we represent all here tonight. So we heard last week that the technology sector is having difficulties with diversity. And so the questions I'd like you to think about and answer tonight is, why is it so hard in the tech sector? What should we be doing differently in the tech sector? And when we reboot, as we will, we don't know when, but it will happen. And the 3 major cities that I've shown here are no longer looking like movie sets, but actually have people in them again. Is that going to be an opportunity for the tech sector to address this issue? Or is this going to, in fact, exacerbate the problems that we already have? So just to get us started, Esther, if you wouldn't mind starting us off, and then Julian, Voltaire, Joanna, feel free to jump in to react. You need to unmute yourself first.
Yes, how clever. This is not the answer. It's one of many answers. One reason it's so hard in tech is you're dealing with a bunch of startups that have no spare capacity. And it makes total sense to hire your friends, form a team with your friends who tend to be like you, whatever you are like, simply because no one else is going to give you the time of day. You know, if you're IBM, you can go out and hire and have a large pipeline. But if you're some little startup, you can't. At the same time, you know, these companies get larger and they forget that they need to change. They forget that they need to, if you have 5 people, you can have a different policy for each person. Once you start getting 10 or 20 people, you need to have standardized policies, and you need to look for people who aren't all the same, that are different from you in backgrounds and perception, whatever. But I must say, I've been around for a long time, as Bruce mentioned, and it's depressing how little has changed. And this is both race and gender. You know, it's just, there's still such a strong bro culture. And I mean, obviously, I'm on the receiving end of it to some extent from being female. I can't count the number of people who send me cosmetics and fashion startups, you know, and that's not what I do. People just make assumptions, and there's an inability to listen to people who aren't like you. And it's not just for profits, it's not for profits. It's endemic, and we need to start right at the beginning. I mean, we need affirmative action with children, not just with hiring pipelines. And I'll leave it at that. There's a lot more to be said, and I hope some of the rest of you will say it.
One of the things I would just add is that one of the reasons I think it's hard is in this industry is that it requires conviction, it requires accountability, and it requires consistency. And when we think about, you know, the founding fathers of tech. If you put together a Mount Rushmore of tech, you know, everybody that you're going to name, whether it's Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or Nikola Tesla or anybody, they're white males. Okay, you know, how far do we have to get before we have somebody who's different than that? And so when it comes to diversity and inclusion, like you're saying, we need to work on the future, but we also have to address the foundation. So there is some deconstructing that has to happen in the process of reconstruct something new. I think another challenge is we have to have vision that goes beyond what we know. And I think you were speaking to that to some degree. It's like, okay, we have these problems, but if we don't have a greater vision, we're not going to be able to escape the good old boy culture that you're talking about. That's been your experience of cosmetics and things that you've received. And so if we don't get an opportunity for people in the technology industry at the foundation that are making decisions, even in this call, we've got diversity on the call as a result of technology. Ironically, the process that creates this platform does not manifest, does not show, does not celebrate diversity and inclusion at the level that every one of us know that should be. And I think there was an article that Forbes just put out talking about Google's diversity and inclusion metrics. And in fact, they haven't just not improved or progressed, they've actually regressed in many areas. So one of the reasons why it's hard is because I think it's a long game. It's not a short play, and we have to stay consistent in it.
Yeah, and just one other thing, and I know I'm out of line, but you know, if you looked at the people who are talking at Lauren's sessions over the course of a year, or you know, anywhere else, any of the accelerators, all these other things, the Black people and women show up when the subject is diversity. They don't show up when the subject is banking or, you know, how to get funded. Or I mean, it's just people who are different from the norm can talk about things beyond what it's like to be different from the norm.
It's very good. Well said.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, if I can just weigh in real quickly. Before I actually make my comment, I just wanted to make one little correction on the bio because it leads to the point that I'm going to make. Actually, it's the reverse. I was in tech for 20 years and then did the JD recently and work for own a tech company where I'm doing some of the legal stuff. But the point is, I've also been in the education sector for a long time. I've been an adjunct instructor at NYU for the past 10 years. And I've done all my degrees in computer science and mathematics. And so my experience was a little different because I've actually been mentored by a very intelligent guy. And I've been teaching for the past 10 years, and I have private tutoring students that I work with. And one of the things that I've noticed is that there's a very different way. I mean, it seems like the entry into tech is not an issue. It's what I think it's more of an interest. And I think it sort of taps a little bit into what Esther just said, because when I look at the way women react to technology and men react to technology, women tend to be more intimidated by it than men. And I see this with my students a lot, and I see less interest coming in. And I know that there are organizations like WW Code and all that, Women Who Code and things like that, that are trying to help women become more comfortable at a younger age or any age in general to enter into the tech environment. But yeah, I mean, that's been my experience.
But I mean, it's worth noting that, you know, tech jobs are not all doing tech. Tech companies need lawyers, they need HR people. And, you know, I often find in the companies I work with, there's also a bias against non-techies. The engineers are celebrated, they get paid, they get the free food. The other people are kind of considered not as important. And it's also invidious. I mean, they also tend to be more female and more non-white, but there's also just this celebration of the tech itself, which I think is a bit wrong-headed because they don't understand their customers, who often are not tech people.
Well, I don't want to. I know that you know, there's don't want to take everybody's time, but I just think one of the things you talked about in relation to kids, and if I don't see myself as being a part of an industry, even if you make the invitation, I'm not coming. So for example, I don't like squash, okay? I don't like squash at all. In fact, it's really bad for me. If you have a party and you have a squash fest, even though I see the invitation, I'm not coming because I recognize it's not for me. And so if this industry is saying something and we're making an invitation, but I don't see myself as being a part of it, it doesn't matter how many signs or whatever you put up until you build a connection and relationship. And that's where the long game happens. That's where mentoring happens. That's where connecting happens at a deep level and says, this is not just for them, this is for you. And when we sit there and think about some of the problems that we're facing as a society, even in this moment of being in a pandemic, think about all the talent that is not represented now. Think about all the intellect that's not represented now. That's not brains, big brains that are not being able to be engaged in a conversation because they've been locked in the process 10, 20 years ago. And what would life be like if we could benefit from that intellect and that intelligence, that perspective? And then perhaps it would be easier to solve some of the problems that we're facing as a civilization and as a people. So I just wanted to say that in relation to what you're saying, Esther.
Thank you.
Voltaire, anything you want to add at this point?
You know, I think anytime, you know, I address diversity, you know, I always bring up the fact that, you know, my background is in behavioral science. And, you know, I had to do research on human behavior in 20 countries, 37 cities of how people achieve goals in life. And one of the things that I realized is that people are inherently tribal. And so if people are inherently tribal, and you're in a system where resources are competition, that tribalism is, you know, going to reflect on every institutional level. And so I think that there are, you know, when it comes to some of these conversations around diversity, you know, are we willing to be honest with ourselves, you know, and asking some tough, disrupting questions? You know, on one end, there are people that don't care. And I'm just trying to, there are some people that are like, I'm just trying to build myself and my team and my community and the people that are comfortable with. For some people, that would make someone feel uncomfortable and they'd feel like, you know, you should think about a greater collective. But, you know, for that person, they might feel like, you know, they're doing, they're just adding value to their community. On the other end, the other tough question is that there are, I think that there are people that advocate for diversity and inclusion, and they're waiting to be included. And they're waiting for somebody to hand them a fish or invite them to a table versus seeing that there's an actual opportunity for them to have agency, for them to build the table or build the fishing rod. And so both sides, the person that doesn't care about the other people, and then the people that don't act on their own agency, I think that what happens is we tend to compromise ourselves in the shared responsibility area where we just are tribal. And then we also compromise ourselves on the personal responsibility area where we actually have agency to solve it, and we shouldn't wait on somebody to solve it for us.
Actually, if I'd like to follow up on that point, the tribalism aspect. I remember back in the early days of internet, now I'm dating myself, how it was proclaimed as the great equalizer, and the tag phrase that nobody on the internet knows you're a dog. Google it if you don't recognize it. And yet here we are in 2020, and just the opposite seems to have occurred, which is that it has actually fragmented more into tribes and given voice to the most extreme tribes rather than easing the entry for populations that previously were having a tough time getting in the door. Anybody want to comment on that?
Well, I think it's important to understand that that the same system that created division is the same system that everybody uses. And so if going back to what Voltaire says about a person or an individual or an organization not caring, well, hey, I'm just going to utilize these new technologies and tools to do the very same thing, to exclude, to put people down, to not champion others. And, you know, you speak about, you know, the dog circumstance. What I'm thinking about now is we're in this reality of COVID, and we have so many kids that are in virtual learning type circumstances. And not everybody has the same opportunity. Not everybody has the same access. So the gaps that we speak about in our society, whether it be wealth, whether it be health, but now we have even a larger technological gap when it comes to education, because some students don't have the same access because they don't have the same opportunity to engage in these new in technology.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with the internet isn't the internet. The problem is the people on it. And the answer goes back ultimately to childhood and what people learn and how where their role models are, the quality of their schooling, all this kind of stuff. And honestly, you know, my hope is that AI is not biased. It reflects our biases. But as we look at the decisions AI makes, they reveal our biases. And so to some extent, AI is a mirror of what we're doing. And my hope is as we do more with AI, we start to train it better than we're training our little human kids to be unbiased and to focus more on fixing what's broken rather than saying, well, this is broken, I predict it won't work.
You know, I think that also to that point, Esther, I think that technology is also an amplifier. We're moving from an analog world
to a digital world that isn't working.
Voltaire, I think
You're frozen.
Frozen. Just to everyone who's on webinar, this is our first, this is only the second time we've ever done a webinar. Voltaire is in Ghana, Africa right now. I think his connection's broken. So Bruce, you want to keep going with your question?
Yeah.
Just one suggestion, Voltaire, if you can hear us,
If you can.
turn off your video and just talk without video.
And everyone, thank you for your patience. We're like
there, he's back.
Oh, there he's back. We're new to this webinar stuff. It's actually freaking me out. I'm a type A personality. And stay with us, everyone. Love my members, all 3,500 of you. Love you guys. Stay with us.
Yeah, sorry about that. That was the internet out here.
We're live. Things happen. Okay. So glad to have you back. Go ahead and finish. And you were.
Yeah, I was saying that I think that if technology is a reflection of the human soul, whatever condition it was in, once this new technology is created, it's also an amplifier. So if there are issues that we have not corrected, those issues within our souls now become automated. And so it just gets amplified progressively. And so I think that this is where you see situations. There's a good book that I think addresses some of this called Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff. And so I think that when you talk about the problems that are within that book, when she talks about tracking behavior and profiting from our behavior of just living, where we're always going to be on the clock working for somebody because we're always tracked and we're generating value, that's going to apply to education, you know, and then where that data, when children and students are being educated, where you can run data and say, well, what is the lifetime value of this child based off of the test scores they receive, how their attention to detail, what is their emotional intelligence, and how does that reflect? This is where some of the technology can get a little bit nefarious. And so I think for us, where as we can see that these things are real and they can create these problems, I think it's on our responsibility to actually create tech solutions that basically reverse engineer the current outcomes or trends that we see that's happening.
Okay, next question. We are in one of the most significant transition phases that certainly in our lifetime and perhaps several lifetimes, the reboot will happen. Is that an opportunity or a threat with respect to the goals and ideals that we've been discussing here?
It's what we make of it.
I was ready to say, I think it's both. You know, I think it's both an opportunity. I think it's both a chance for the bad guys to win, so to speak. I really love what Voltaire said about the amplification of the human soul. And so if my intent is to hoard, if my intent is to dominate, the technology gives me the opportunity to do that at a higher level. I think it's important for us to recognize the opportunities that present themselves to us in this industry, in this space, so we can take advantage of them and create spaces and places for other people, other voices that have not been included, to be a part of it. And so because we're here, we have the opportunity to use our voices to create space for those that don't have that space, that opportunity. And so much of it isn't on, what did Dr. King say? It isn't, you know, the voice of the enemies is the silence of friends. And so sometimes I think we think about, okay, well, if we change the bad guys, and yeah, obviously, you know, that's a part of this conversation. But the question is, what am I doing to contribute? What am I doing to invest? What am I doing to provide my talent, my gift, my opportunity, my passion, my purpose? How do I do those things so that those coming behind me, the generation that's on its way, has space and place that perhaps we didn't have. And so as we talk about diversity and inclusion a decade from now, we're having a different discussion. And it isn't just you know, color and race and gender. It's diversity of perspective, diversity of experience, different gift mix and talent, and emotional, you know, and cultural intelligence. That's important as well as we have this conversation and discussion around diversity and inclusion, because it should encompass more, though we reduce it, you know, to sometimes a very small lane.
My question is to all of you is, what tech is going to help us with all of these goals? You've all said amazing goals. What tech?
I think that there's I look at this as an opportunity. I mean, especially if you know, when it highlights diversity issues, this is an opportunity to, you know, design or use diversity for inclusive design, anything from product design or software design, as well as like even machine learning. In machine learning, traditional machine learnings, I can understand the reinforcement of biases, but today with more, with reinforcement learning algorithms or more powerful reinforcement algorithms, these are algorithms that are designed to avoid that from happening, that basically can learn with these new different diverse diverse data and remodel. So I think it's moving away from that more static model. But in terms of like diversity, what I'm in software design or inclusive software design, I'm seeing a lot of companies that are taking advantage of this, including Microsoft, IBM, and UX, and all of them that are trying to create methodologies to onboard people of diverse backgrounds for perspective into design. There's a lot of teachers in the universities that are teaching this. So I think this is a perfect opportunity to really, see what's out there and see what needs to be improved and incorporate that in methodologies and toolkits and things like that.
I come at it from a sort of different perspective. I work in 5 small communities, and we're trying to figure out how can we turn this crisis into, the sort of disruption that lets things fall back into a better place. And clearly lots of people are going to lose their jobs, probably not so many in the tech sector, but in lots of other sectors. And one thing we can do is have a lot of online training courses so these people can become teachers and care workers and mental health counselors. There's going to be a huge need, unfortunately, for mental health counseling when this thing is over. People are undergoing all kinds of strains and domestic abuse and family violence and stuff like that. And it's a huge opportunity, not just to give people handouts, but to give them money to go get trained and then have them do meaningful work that's actually going to contribute to society and help the next generation of kids be healthier and happier. And to me, that's the huge opportunity. I tried mentioning this at a Council on Foreign Relations seminar earlier today, and it wasn't exactly jumped at by most of the people there, but it's, we're starting to think slightly long-term, partly because we're seeing, my God, this virus actually, the virus doesn't discriminate, but the people who are poor and discriminated against in other ways are much more vulnerable to it. And they're costing society a lot more because they're getting sick. So we're starting to think, well, how can we fix this? And we really need to take advantage of that.
When you say, is it an opportunity or, a setback, I'm a big believer that negatives can push positives forward. I believe in the principle in mathematics where a negative times itself can equal a positive. Littlefinger in Game of Thrones, he said chaos is a ladder. And I believe that, where sometimes people fear the storm is the very thing that can create a window that would never have come before in the status quo. And so for me, when Lauren, when you ask about what type of technologies, going back to, where the world is going, where things are automated, how do you create automated tech solutions that do the same things that you see the market doing, but where they're designed with a social enterprise component? So for example, a parking lot that when you pay, it finances all the schools in the neighborhood. And so where just by parking, you're funding school. Or for example, let's say, something like when you're talking about diversity in education, creating an app where it's a homeschool based and the educators that are in your local community can educate children via an app just like Uber. And now all of a sudden it's automated. You've created a system where you're creating jobs for people that are at home, where they can plug in to different students within the neighborhood, and they can be on teleconferences educating students within their neighborhood. And parents can press buttons and say what type of curate the lesson plan and the style of education they want from a cultural perspective. And the people that are in the marketplace or in that environment are able to fill that demand.
That's amazing, but is that possible?
I think that you know, people asked if Uber is possible.
Yeah.
People asked if Google was possible. If Donald Trump can be president, anything is possible. You know, and so that being said, you know, I think that that's where, you know, sometimes my mouth can get me in trouble because I challenge more of the do-gooders than the people that we know what their values are. You know, I think they've been very honest and clear that, you know, that's not necessarily the direction we want to go. And it's okay if somebody says, hey, you know, I don't want you at my table. But once you know that to be true, then you have the opportunity to say, well, you know what, I can build my own table. And that actually, when you solve it, now you've created your own business and you can employ the people that share your values.
Right. It all seems super like spacey, like the cartoons. What was that cartoon where everything in the future was really wild? I mean, if we could make these things happen, why wouldn't we? The pandemic's happening. I mean, is this even worth it to discuss diversity, discuss education during this crisis? Is it worth it? That's something to think about, you know? For the other people, the people in Michigan who are having guns and assault weapons and standing on the courthouses and saying, hey, we want to go back to work. That's bringing it back to just reality. Is this all worth it to even talk about today?
In fact, I would maintain that given the lack of diversity that we saw in those groups who were protesting, I would say that makes it even more imperative to be talking about diversity at this moment. So we're coming towards the end. I'd like to ask one last question, actually two. But so first one, everybody gets a minute or so. If you had a magic wand at this moment, other than solving the virus crisis itself, but in the context
if anyone here is going to solve the virus crisis, speak up now.
We've seen them on the other panels. But anyway, so take the magic wand. What would be like the one or two wishes that you would ask for? And asking for no more wishes isn't one of the options.
Okay, Esther, come on. You have something to say.
I'll say what I've already been saying. It would be effective childcare. And, you know, in AI, we talk about training AIs and giving them values and judgment. And we need to train our infant brains as well as we train our AIs. And if we did that, they would tell us, you know, you guys go sit in the corner, we're going to fix it for you. Because they would be happy and healthy and resilient.
And Voltaire, your response?
You're on mute.
To the question about the magic wand?
Yes.
I think that if I could wish for anything, based on my research with goal achievement, I think a lot of these problems are rooted in self-esteem issues. And so I would wish for the people that feel that they need to wait for somebody to be included to have more self-esteem and confidence in themselves to know that they have everything they need to create what they say they want.
Joanna, what do you think?
No, I agree with Voltaire very much on that. I think that's very close. I mean, that's one of my wishes too, because I think if people had that self-esteem and can bring, you know, it would be really helpful to formulate. I would say one of the most interesting things that I would like to see is formulating a diverse team to in design, you know, in software design, because it's like from a practical perspective, when you build features into a software, it's hard to really see it from some other perspective, from somebody that you walk in different shoes. So it would be really good to have a team of designers come together and really share perspectives and usability of software so that the design can really be optimized that way and really be far reaching.
We used to do that. Is that not done anymore?
Well, I think that it's, you know, in terms of like this, you know, accessibility and making software more accessibility in terms of not only disability, but in more of inclusive, I think it's not there. I really don't think it's there. I think that, you know, there's a way to approach it. It's hard to get and practical from in terms of time and cost and everything. It's very hard to get software built so inclusive for such an inclusive population when it comes to, like, you know, when you're adding features, especially with technology. It's easier to add nice and new and bells and whistles and features, but it's very costly to implement that, to make that accessible to everybody. And I think we're not there yet. And I think that it would be really good to, you know, develop a robust methodology to achieve that.
And Julian, what do you say?
Okay, 2 wishes. First wish would be for
Wait,
us.
you only get one. You don't get
No,
two.
He said 2. He said 2.
Oh, he said
Okay.
2. Okay.
Okay. So I'm gonna utilize my wishes. Wish number 1, that we would move from abundance, scarcity mentality to abundance mentality. Because if I have a scarcity mentality, I have fear and I try to dominate because I feel like I'm not going to have enough. So if we can shift
and you
from that
go home
perspective,
with 48 packs of toilet paper.
there you go. Absolutely. Okay. And hand sanitizer. The second thing would be for there to be space and place for every person to achieve the highest level of their human potential. And it goes back to what I said earlier. Think about, if we had space for everyone, how much brain power, how much talent that is not being utilized, that is wasting away or wasted away because there's not been a doorway for them to have access.
Okay, and now last question. In the spirit of think global, act local, there's another one that, Google it if you've never heard that before. What would you like the people who have been listening in very patiently, and we thank you for that, by the way, what do you want, what advice do you have for them? What can they go do concretely in their workplaces, in their communities, in their families, perhaps? What would you like them to do?
Esther, you should talk first.
You know, again, it's not the answer to everything. Go reach
Then
out.
forget it. Then forget it.
42.
Go reach out to someone you don't know. You know, take a risk, find a new friend, sit next to the stranger at lunch. You know, if you're hiring, go beyond the usual suspects. And, you know, people, it's like, if you've got a friend, you will, well, it's something that venture capitalists do a lot to women, and I'm sure also to Black people. They ask the guy, you know, what are your wildest dreams? And they ask the woman, what'll you do if something goes wrong? You know, like, take a positive risk and see if you can help someone become successful. I mean, in terms of personal advice, I always tell people, never take a job you're already qualified for. And as an employer, hire somebody who wants to learn, not someone who's already done the job. You know, cast your net more widely and look for outsized returns by being slightly more risky in who you hire.
Cool. Voltaire?
So I champion that comment that Esther said. I think that it's about risk taking. If you keep doing the same, you'll get the same. And I think that in this moment in time when things are chaotic, it's one of the best times to take a risk. And I know that might seem counterintuitive for people or listeners that are hearing, but I think that you have to be willing to take a risk for whatever you say that you want. So whether it's a startup, or if there's a certain social issue that's bothering you, taking a positive risk and setting goals, and put KPIs to those goals, and walk it out, and be okay with, failing and getting learnings from that failure. And I think that if that happens, I think that the needle will move.
That's cool. Joanna? You're muted, Joanna.
Sorry about that. One of the things that I think is really uplifting is, or one of the assumptions I think is easy for people to make, especially in leadership roles, is to think that everybody comes to the table at the same, maybe not at the same level, but like, or have certain assumptions of somebody's qualifications, just because, like, for example, if you hire a bunch of developers that are all going to be at the same level and capabilities, one of the things I've noticed with my students and interns is that, they're at different levels. And like what I mentioned at the beginning of the chat here is that, women come in from a different perspective, more often insecure or have insecurities compared to men. And I think that if you're in a leadership position, is to really understand where, where each individual's gaps are, or figuring out where they are currently, and then helping them reach their potentials and goals. Because I see some developers that run very fast with something, some that are, reluctant, but then once you unleash it, they can really do amazing things. And it's just putting that extra effort into really seeing where somebody is, and then uplifting them to be able to reach their goals.
Cool. Julian?
I think we have to learn by listening to others, and having the humility to have our perspective impacted and expanded by the journey and life of someone else.
Cool.
And then I'm going to take my prerogative and answer my own question from my own experience of managing large, often multicultural, multinational teams. Anybody out there who's in an executive position listening to this, my advice to you is don't be afraid to start small. You don't have to swap out half of your team tomorrow, but I can tell you that if in the next, say, let's just say the next 10 people that you hire, if 3 or 4 of them come from non-traditional backgrounds, different from the rest of your team, don't just do one, because then it looks like token, and it might be. Make sure that it's not just tokenism. But if you're serious about it, try to go for 3 or 4 or even 5 of your next 10, and make sure that you're serious about it. And you'll notice that the diversity of candidates will change once word gets out. And soon you'll discover that you don't have to do anything, that your candidate pool will have just been multiplied by exponentially, and you'll have a greater range to choose from. And you will also, I hope you will discover, as I did, that your productivity, your quality, your level of collaboration, your creativity, all the things you're looking for actually also explode exponentially as your team becomes more diverse, with one condition. You as the executive have to be willing to listen to that range of values and opinions and viewpoints that will be presented from that diverse team.
If I can just add one thing about the 3 people, it's really important because they support one another. If you have one person in a group of 10, it's, they just, there's no, they're not getting that kind of support from other people. If you have 3 people in a group of 30, that's fine, because the three support one another. The other thing is, if you have just one woman or one Black guy, they're asked to represent all Black people or all women. And if you have three, you know, you have the noisy one, the smart one, the funny one, and suddenly, you know, they differ, not just being in the other, but you get to see, oh, there's different kinds of whatever that different kind of person is.
So thank you, everybody on the panel. Lauren, back to you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Bruce. All of you panelists, Julian, Voltaire, Joanna, Esther. We'll be back again. We have 2 more webinars. Just follow up on these webinars. We have a month-long series just to kind of follow up. I hope you all join us. Go to Disruptive Technologists in NYC Meetup, and you can log into our other meetups, and we look forward to seeing you next week, every Wednesday, 6 o'clock. Thank you, everyone. You guys were fabulous. Really, thank you.
Thank you.
Gave me a new
Take care.
perspective on webinars. This was cool. Great.
Take a risk.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Love you guys.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
I'll send you the video.